Thank you so much, Georgie, for joining us today. Georgina is from St James's Place. She is here to talk to us about founder finance fundamentals and making it sustainable for you as a founder, both in life and work. We all know how overwhelming that can be. So this session is going to be a great insight. Georgie is my financial planner, and I've known her for maybe about a year or so now. And I just wanted to start by asking, what led you into this field at the very
Um,
beginning? How did you get into it?
so it wasn't something I thought I'd do as a child. I wasn't dreaming of pensions and spreadsheets and cash flows, but I think for me, I finished uni, went and studied fashion and textile management, and then graduated, came out of university, realised absolutely wasn't the right career path for me, and then somehow ended up in financial services, which at the time it was kind of a bit of a stopgap until I decided what I wanted to do. But then it's such a different role than what I thought it would be because it's about people. And it's
Mm,
as much as, you need the knowledge and the experience and the understanding. My job is 90% therapist and 10% just speaking to people and understanding what fits. So it was accidental, but it happened and I love it and I would do nothing else but this now.
And talk to us a little bit that 90%. What are the things that come up generally in those kind of therapy sessions?
So when you're with a client, when they're trusting you with their finances, it almost becomes it's such a personal and intricate and taboo subject. They just then start to trust you. So you're talking about their family relationships, you're talking about real personal issues, about their health and well-being, because ultimately, to do my job very, very well, I need to understand the whole picture because
Mm.
a lot of the planning that I do is legacy planning. It's planning for now, for their children, for their grandchildren. So it just not every client becomes a friend, but you do have a very personal relationship as a financial advisor, I think.
Yeah, and I think, it comes down to the individual financial advisor. I mean, just as an example, I spoke to probably three or four before I started working with you because you have to have that chemistry, right? You've got to
Yeah.
feel, as you say, like you trust that person
Mhm.
beyond just the numbers, and that you understand what they're saying and feel confident enough to move forward with what they're suggesting.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I think it's so overwhelming sometimes, and I think it can be complex, but it doesn't need to be. But I think, and it works both ways. You have to get on and you have to click and have that instant connection because when you are working with someone, for me, I always say you have one financial advisor, and that financial advisor should then see you through for the rest of your life. Ultimately, touch wood, nothing happens. But the whole part of having someone that you trust and you get on with is that you will continue to work with them for the future.
Um, and when it comes to founders, I'm going to presume you work with other founders than just myself.
Mhm.
Um, how do you see that pressure as different, or that those questions as different, I suppose, those issues that people come to you with?
I think the biggest problem, not the biggest problem, but I think that people are so afraid of seeking financial advice and they think that they don't need a financial consultant because they're too early on in their career or they don't have wealth. But that's not the point. A lot of clients that I help, I'm not saying, right, well, you need to invest X amount now and that's that. For me, a lot of it is just walking towards those milestones. And a perfect example, I met a wonderful lady the other day. We sat, we had a coffee, we had a chat, and there is nothing that I can help her with financially right now. But that will likely be in 18 months, 2 years' time that we will then sit down, but we're walking towards that. But
Yeah.
I think it's just those concerns where people don't really know where to start and they're not really aware of, what they may need in place. And people just bury their heads in the sand and think, oh,
Yeah.
I'll leave it. I'll leave it for now.
And do you see, I suppose, founders, business owners, there's a big difference between budgeting for your family and maybe for your future and planning financially for a business. Do you
Mhm.
see people getting that wrong, or is there kind of a type that is good at both things?
I think the problem is naturally finance, with whether it's personal or business, they will naturally cross over. They are interlinked. So it's just about being comfortable in both areas. And I really like personally when people compartmentalize so they can see what their personal finances are, what their business finances
Mm,
are. And it just becomes a bit clearer because when it gets hazy, then you're thinking, right, I need an emergency fund for, if my husband gets sick or, school fees. Having a separate sort of personal versus business, I think just works really well. How you support the business versus how you support the family are two different umbrellas, I think.
yeah, I think that's a really important distinction, actually.
Mm.
And just having those separately in your bank accounts and making sure that stuff is, which is less of a concern here in arguably in the UAE, because we don't have the same. We were just talking about HMRC before we joined the call. We don't have the same levels of tax. We don't have the same levels of licensing as well to a certain extent. So presumably it can get a lot muddier a lot more quickly here.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, heaven forbid, worst case scenario, if something did happen, it's not the same as in the UK where you would have a benefit system or a support system, whether that be family, whether that's Department of Work and Pensions that would pay university. There's all these different elements as well that, you have to consider whether it's a business in the UK or the UAE, because, what you might get in the UK, it's unlikely that you'll get here and vice versa. So it's just understanding what's what.
Um, Mass generalization here, but
Mm.
in terms of the people that you work with, I know that women are a big part of your work. It's a space that you're very passionate about in terms of empowering more women to take control of their finances. Do you see, when you're on a call with males, females, whatever, do you see a difference in the way that they perceive their finances and their kind of longer term view?
No, I think it's quite funny. So, if I'm working with a personal private client, retail client, whether it's male or female, they've both got the same objective. So it's whether that's school fees for the children, longer term
Mm,
retirement planning, or their next big family home, whatever that may look like. So everyone has the same goals and objectives. It's just how it's really females are probably more open and more honest, a bit softer. Sometimes men can be, uh, I think, a little bit more guarded.
right.
It's one way to put it, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we
Mm.
probably I have this conversation on many different topics from a male female perspective, and
Mm.
that is often the case, right? There is a kind of maybe a bit more of a fear factor, maybe, I don't know, there's certainly an element of of lack of transparency or kind of defensiveness in some respects.
Yeah.
And arguably, when it comes to lots of these issues that we talk about, it's men that need help more than women in many areas. So yeah, always encouraging openness in the founder sanctuary with all of our male our male attendees and our male colleagues in this space. But okay, I'm going to hand it over to you now
Okay.
to talk a little bit about how we can manage our finances a bit more sustainably as founders, and just your experience around that, just to help everybody who's in this position in their first kind of few years of business, who may be feeling a bit overwhelmed. Through
Yeah,
this
and
process.
this is not to scare people because I do love numbers naturally. So I will be putting statistics within this presentation, not for people to think, "Hmm, wow," but it's just a really good indicator, I think, for people to see, wow, that is a huge number. So the first statistic, which I have to talk about, 62% of entrepreneurs, so, financial well-being, it impacts their mental health and their well-being. and people don't feel comfortable talking about it. So 62% is such a huge figure of people that just don't have that, because it is such a taboo subject. People are not comfortable with talking about finances, whether it's the good, bad, or ugly. It needs, sometimes when you offload and you share those problems, you feel better. But I think sometimes we all shout and scream about the highs. And when stock markets are through the roof, I don't get phone calls saying, oh, things are going really well. But when things then start to go down or there's turmoil, that's when then people really start to worry. And I may get phone calls or people may sit on it. But for me, the key thing with finance is that we need to get to a place where we are so much more comfortable with talking about it openly and honestly. It's not saying, oh, I earned 2 dirhams yesterday and I earned 200,000 dirhams yesterday. It's just about saying, oh, look, I had a really bad day financially or a really bad week financially. It wasn't a good week for us in terms of business. We didn't release the stock, or I didn't sell as many holidays as I wanted. But actually, that's okay because we've got a plan in place and this is what it looks like. So part of that is to talk about budgeting, talking about buffers, and just trying to make sense of it all as a founder, basically. So some of the things that I wanted to cover, if I had my presentation here, which I'm not going to use. I'm in finance. I'm not meant for presentations. So it's about budgeting and forecasting, about building an emergency buffer. A key thing for founders for me is insurance and just understanding the options available. Whilst it might not be appropriate now, it may be something that people need to think about in the future. The longer term goal and savings, I'm a real advocate for that as well. So understanding people's future plans, retirement plans and things like that, and how the business fits. And then I've got some templates that I can then send out after the session if people want to use those. So starting off, forecasting and budgeting. So the key thing here is knowing your numbers. So going back to what we discussed earlier, it's about understanding both your personal and business finances. So it doesn't have to be in a terrifying spreadsheet, although I do love a spreadsheet because I think it's a really clear, concise way to break down those numbers. But without a forecast, you are essentially driving blind. You've not got anything that you're working towards or what you're focusing on. So it's really good to write everything down and have it there in black and white. So part of it is what's coming in, what's going out, what's the emergency fund if you were unable to work, or you're not releasing stock, or you've not got the income coming in. So it's, if you're not budgeting, you're guessing. That's the key thing. And most of us overestimate what we can spend and we underestimate how tight things can get. So that for me is really key. So you can burn through your savings because you've not got this in place. And a spreadsheet is not overcomplicated. You just need a dashboard to understand where you need to tweak things. So that's a really straightforward 101 for me, is the budgeting and forecasting. Really straightforward. So we then have, building the buffer, so the emergency fund. So this for me is like your business's personal insurance policy. So it has to be, for me, between 3 to 6 months of essential spending. So you can break it down. So I would have personal and then I would have a business one, because it gives you breathing room. And for me, it's that sleep easy at night money, where if you were unable to work or you couldn't work, you know that you have got that buffer there for whatever reason that is. So the one thing that I will circle back to as well at this point is affordability. So I can sit here and say, well, you need 3 months of your essential spending put aside, and that could be 60,000 dirhams. It could be 100,000 dirhams. But all of this comes down to affordability. So it's all very well in me saying this, but unless you've got that money there, or you've got that extra money to put aside, then even if it is just 100 or 200 dirhams a month and you're building that gradually over time, it really doesn't matter. Something is better than nothing. It's just getting in that discipline and that mindset of saving and putting money aside. Before I speak to any of my clients on a personal level with investing, the one thing that I will always make sure that they have is essential money put aside. and any sort of upcoming spending or anything like that. So because your business and your personal life, they're so deeply linked. So if you have clarity in one, you will have clarity in the other. And that's ultimately what you need to have to sleep easy at night. And I'm going to throw in another statistic. So 52% of small businesses have less than 3 months of essential spending. So it's just to say it's a really important factor as part of your early days. That is the one thing that I would be encouraging people to do. It's just starting to build that emergency fund. Just needs to sit there. Happy with all that so far, Helen? I feel like I'm just waffling and talking.
Oh no, it's perfect. Thank you. It's really, yeah,
Excellent.
really. I can see Charlie making notes. It's always a good sign.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm jotting away here.
Good. This is the bit that I am very passionate about. So this is insurance, and this is the bit where I think we overlook insurance only because it's a topic that no one really likes to talk about. And it is because it's talking about the sad things. It's the what ifs, you know, what if something happened and you were unable to work, or what if, you know, worst case scenario, you know, you could never return to work. What happens? How are the school fees paid? How's that rent paid, the mortgage? How are all these different variables paid? And dependent on what position you're at in your founding journey, it then depends on, you know, how dependent you are on that income that you're then bringing in. But for me, there's various levels of insurance that you can get in terms of business. But if the business wouldn't cope without your heartbeat, then for me, key person insurance is absolutely key for the business. Because if something happens to you, another member of your team, it avoids the business becoming financially vulnerable. And I think for any company, if you've spent all this time and effort and money into building something and then all of a sudden you can't work anymore, then the business is absolutely stuffed. So insurance is really basic, and it's the one thing that we don't talk about enough because it's just not something that I think people necessarily have a real awareness of. But if you look at, so only 18% of small medium enterprises have key person insurance, which is terrifyingly small. And in the UK, it's a great way to offset expenses, but equally, it's just something that's just really important for founders. So 71% of people say that their businesses would fail within the first 12 months without the key person there. And it's like I think it's like 50% of businesses fail because of a medical reason and someone being unable to work. So it is probably, after saving your emergency funds or alongside that, I would be looking at insurance. And again, it's the affordability piece. You could sit and say, oh, you know, you need 2 million worth of key person cover. But if you've only got a budget of, I don't know, 200 dirhams a month, and that's wildly unrealistic. So it's all very well for someone to sit there and say, I think that this is what you need, and run the calculations based on the business or the profits of the business and everything else. But you have to work around the client and you have to work around their goals and their financials, because if not, it doesn't work. But also the whole point of having a financial consultant is that these factors are reviewed. So what you discuss today may be completely different in 6 months, 12 months, 5 years time. So it's just about having that fluid, you know, conversation, or if you're doing it yourself, just actively reviewing things and making sure it's still in line with what the business needs. And that's the key thing with finance. It's not right, I'm just going to do this on day one and that's it. It's something that needs to be reviewed frequently. And even if it is just looking at the spreadsheet with your cash flow planning once a week, or, you know, things need to be reviewed, and it needs to be an organic process. That's the number one thing as well. So secondly, long-term savings. I do love my job sometimes. So this is the thing. So with the longer term savings, and it's really tedious because we are not programmed to think about longer term savings, but it's one of those things where if you don't talk about it now, it will be 15 years, and then it'll be 15 years too late because it's not been discussed. And I think sometimes, you know, it can feel counterintuitive to save for retirement while growing a business, but you can have pockets. You can have lots of different pockets of savings and investments or money in the bank. It doesn't have to be, right, I must succeed at my business before I can do X, Y, and Z. You can do, without becoming too overwhelmed, you can do everything at once. It's just how you pocket those different pots of money for whatever it is that you need. And that's, you know, you keep putting money back into the business, but if you're not then thinking of the longer term, you know, at what point do you stop? And that's the thing here. Retirement age in the UAE is 60, but you can get a visa extended to 65. But equally, you know, do you really want to work until you're 65? It's all those variables of, you know, retirement planning is huge, and I could talk about retirement planning for far too long, life and soul of the party. But the business isn't a guaranteed exit plan. There are so many what ifs, and I think having a well-rounded understanding of your funds, whether that's passive income from property, whether that is the business and that's going to generate you some kind of income, but it's having those savings and having that pot of money which you've then earmarked for your retirement, I think is key. So I did a little calculation just to put it into real terms, because I always think it looks better when you can see the numbers. So if you were to save £1,000 a month for 25 years at 6% growth rate, that would give you around 580,000. If you were to save £2,000 a month, that's going to give you about 1.16 million. So it's huge, and you've got all these investing, whatever, however you build that pot, it's great. But that million, what it would actually give you if you were to take an income at retirement of say 6 or 7%, it would give you 70,000 a year, which sounds nice. But actually, when you think about your lifestyle, your spending, the holidays, the cost of living, inflation, actually that 70,000, whilst it seems quite attractive, potentially may not be enough for what you want to get out of your income at retirement. So it's, for me, it's also about thinking about those pots of money and thinking about the longer term goal and just trying to understand all of that. And I really love a cash flow planning tool that you can use that then demonstrates, which Helen and I have actually been through together, where you can sit and forecast and plot. So you can say what retirement looks like, so what the end goal is, whether that's 45, 55 or 65, what the target income is, and then you can factor all of that into this cash flow system, and it will give you then an outcome to say, yeah, you're going to be really great at retirement, or actually there's things that need to be tweaked and worked at in order for you to get there. But again, I've got to pull it back to affordability, because if a client sits there and says, I want £500,000 a year to retire on, and they've not even started saving yet, then there's a slight problem. And the likelihood is that what I would then suggest they would need to save a month is probably not affordable. So it's just about trying to understand all these different elements when you're thinking of financial planning as a founder. So financial wellbeing, this is it, because I can talk and talk about this subject, but I don't want to bore people, because I understand it can be quite tedious at times, and it's very unique, and it is down to each individual circumstance. So for me personally, financial well-being, it's not about being rich. And for some of you, it could be that, you know, it's providing for your children's future. It could be that you want freedom and more time. It could be that you want an afternoon nap at 2 o'clock and not have to worry, or you just want to sleep easy at night and not worry about cash flow at 3 a.m. in the morning. It causes so much anxiety sometimes talking about money, but it doesn't need to be scary. It doesn't need to be terrifying. It just needs to be that you find someone that you trust, and if they can help you and help you with your journey, it releases such a weight, I think, when people have just that moment to breathe and think, gosh, I can finally actually talk about this, and I'm not being judged, and it's actually not terrifying, and actually things aren't as bad as I thought they seemed, and they never are. They never are as bad as they seem. I just think that we all get it in our heads. I do it with myself every time I give myself a financial review. It's horrendous. But you're not the only one in this situation, and you're not the only one trying to wing it or trying to make it work. It's just about having those open and honest conversations, not just with someone that works in finance, but with friends, colleagues, founders, whoever that may be. And I just think it just makes people feel so much better. So yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Georgie. That all made a lot of sense. And you referred to some of the things obviously that we'd been through and talked about. And for me, when I came to you, it was just, as you say, having this kind of visual representation of all the ingoings and the incomings and the outgoings, and how that not looked on a weekly or monthly basis, but over a longer period of time. And then being able to track it back and saying, okay, well, this is where something needs to shift or change. This is how this will likely pan out, so you don't need to worry so much about that. And I think it's a very complicated, for me anyway, as a non-numbers person, certainly non-finance person, it's a very complicated thing to try and do on your own, and it's quite scary. I think you would probably make a few horrible errors, one or another.
But this is the thing, and everyone should have a financial advisor, because everyone needs some help in some way, shape, or form with their finances. And that's like, for example, I don't know how to colour my hair, so my hairdresser does it. And it's just everyone knowing what their areas of expertise are.
Yeah.
And then everyone sort of stays in their lane. And I think that's the thing. It's finance doesn't, I think people are so fearful sometimes of finance or financial services and financial advisors, but it doesn't need to be. My biggest advice to anyone doing it would be just to get the basics done. So just get your emergency money, check out your national insurance. And then if you do need more help and support, whoever you decide to use, just make sure that they're regulated. That would be my biggest advice, especially in Dubai. In the UK, it's pretty standard in terms of regulation, but here it's just a completely different ball game.
Yeah. And I'd also say it can feel a little bit like going to a car mechanic or something. If you don't know anything about cars, and you rock up with your car that you think is absolutely fine, and they say, oh God, you need thousands of pounds worth of work done here and here. And you're like, well, I don't know any different, so I'm just going to pay it, right? And I think it's one of those things, as you say, get the basics done. And then once there are some offers on the table of, you could invest in this vehicle, or you could look at these stocks, or you could look at things this way, then, go and have a little shop around and talk to different people and get some different advice.
Yeah, and as well, you take it in your own time. And for me, like, the first thing that you do with a client is you build the rapport. You don't go in day one and talk about investment products and you need X, Y, and Z. It's the holistic planning side, and it's understanding everything and all the emotions, and it's the therapy piece. It's really drilling down into, why people are doing this and what their ultimate outcome is. And I think once you've got that and you've built trust with someone, it's the rest should be quite straightforward. But yeah, it is. I know what you mean in terms of people are fearful with the costing and people don't know what it's going to be. But with me, there's no obligation either. So you could have 3 meetings, and then it's not that you've got to sign a bit of paper and give me a check. It's just not like that. And I think it's nice because it takes the pressure off people. It doesn't make people feel that they have to do something.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And like you say, it is never as bad as you think it's going to be. The worst case scenario that sits in your head is very unlikely to be the case, and it's very easily resolved. Talking about this stuff, as you said, is a massive weight lifted. And then you've got a plan, and worst comes to worst, you execute on that plan, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for your wise insights and advice, as always. Charlie, any questions from your side that have come up during this chat?
I've got quite a list of questions, if that's
great.
I was just like jotting things down. You covered a few things, but obviously regulations here. You hear horror stories about it.
Yeah.
Like, how does it all work? Because, like you say, I think in the UK there's a system, isn't there?
UK, you've got the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, which is the regulator in the UK. But here, so for the firm that I work with, they are DIFC based. So I'm actually based, and then I'm authorised and regulated by the DFSA and the DIFC. So it's for me, it's being in that field is peace of mind, and we're quite lucky because the firm that I work for, they've pretty much mirrored how it looks in the UK. So they're pretty strict on compliance and everything else.
Nice. I guess the question is, you mentioned it, like you can have, 3 meetings and there's no obligation, but what kind of fees are attached to using your services? If I came to you and said, this sounds great, like what would the process be from here?
The process would usually be, so I would probably have a couple of meetings to really understand the client and just kind of understand what we're trying to plan for. I'd also do the cash flow planning probably ahead of any recommendation, because I just think it's good for clients to see. And then if, say, for example, you said, or Joe Blogg said that they wanted to set up a regular contribution of X amount into an offshore bond, dependent on their circumstances, the tax situation and everything else, we would analyse that per individual. And then the cost is then built into the bond, so, or whatever product we're recommending. So there'll always be an upfront cost and there'll always be an ongoing cost. That is dependent on the funds that you're invested in. And then, but I would explain it all. So what we usually do for clients is we produce an illustration, and then it breaks it all down into pounds and pence, and you will see exactly what will be deducted from your units. So you'll know, but on an average, the ongoing cost is around 2%, but that comes out of the unit. So, but yeah, average.
And I presume you review the risk rates and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of what we'd do is that we would sit and have an understanding of whether you'd had any previous investment experience or what you are comfortable with in terms of appetite for risk. And then once we've understood that, we would then look through the different portfolios and make a recommendation based on where you are most comfortable. But the beauty with it is the ongoing cost, whether you see me 5 times a year or once a year, it's the same. So it doesn't matter. So for clients that are investing for the first time, I would encourage them to see me a lot more frequently, because it can be really overwhelming sometimes. And whilst you're getting comfortable with like the literature and all the jargon and stuff that we throw at clients, it's good just whilst you're feeling comfortable, just to have frequent reviews. And you can rebalance portfolios. So what's appropriate today will not be appropriate necessarily in 5 years' time. So it's then just about making sure that we're reviewing it. We can rebalance our funds or clients' portfolios 20 times a year with no additional charge. If you're doing it more than that, then that's just absolutely ridiculous, because I would not be recommending that. But yeah, so you can rebalance, and it's just quite a nice way to, if you're walking towards retirement, you naturally may not be as high risk as what you are now. So you would then start scaling back the different assets within the portfolio.
Nice. And I know you mentioned, obviously for you, I imagine speaking to people at any point of their journey, as you said, is great. Is there a minimum level of wealth someone needs to have to work with you, or you just take it on and kind of see what their journey?
Yeah, for me, it's about just having those conversations early on, because I think if you start saying, right, well, there is a minimum investment level with St James's Place, but for me, I would never ask a client to disclose their income before a meeting. For me, it's just about, because you may not be able to help that person now, like my client the other day, but actually in 5 years' time, their business that they founded would then be worth millions. And then they think, oh, that Georgie that I saw, she was such a lovely girl. I must ring her and have a conversation. So for me, that's just kind of how it works. It's, and the way I build my business is through recommendation and referrals. So for me, it's just making sure I could do a good job for people.
Nice. And I think the last one, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you advise on like life insurance and wills, and do you have partners, I presume, that
all of
can
those.
assist that side as well?
Yeah, life insurance I am a huge advocate for, because as I've said, I love statistics, but when you start looking at people that actually don't have life insurance here. It actually blows my mind. It's and
Guilty.
but do you know what the problem is? And I think that I spoke to someone a few months ago, and I think it might have even been you, Helen, actually, that said this. So I'm just quoting you. But people don't think about the longer term strategy here. I think that no one really knows how long they're going to be in Dubai for. So it feels that it's easy to put off planning these things because you think, oh, that's all right. I'll be going home in 2 years when my visa expires. And then all of a sudden it's 10 years and there's no will, there's no retirement planning or no life insurance. So you are not alone, and most people are probably in the majority as well, but it's such an important factor, and especially if you've got one key earner in the house, because if that one key earner no longer works or they've been let go from work and then they don't get their death in service anymore, and then the worst possible scenario happens, and then you've got extortionate rent or mortgage rates and 2 or 3 kids in private school, it might be a bit of a headache.
Yeah, because I hadn't realised that my will in the UK is now like null and void now that
And it will, if you've got assets in the UK, it will still be appropriate. But I have got someone that I can pass on for wills. Can we take
it's just, I guess I didn't. Yeah, one of those things that you don't think about, do you, until someone else up, and
No,
then
you
it's like,
don't. And I used to recommend people get wills all the time in the UK, bearing in mind I've been doing this job for like over a decade. And it was only as I left to come here that I sorted out my will and power of attorney in case something happened. But even here, it's so important because even though all of our assets are predominantly in the UK, it's more around children here. So if something happens and what happens to kids. But the next.
Thank you so much, Georgie, for all of your amazing insights. And I think, we've certainly learned something today from a UK and a UAE perspective. And, highly recommend speaking to Georgie separately and go through some of these exercises that she's mentioned. Georgie, where can people get hold of you? Where are your
I'll send
online
them to
hangouts?
you. I'll send my email address, phone number, and then if anyone wants to get in touch or they've got any questions, they can then follow up with an email or whatever.
Brilliant. And you're on LinkedIn?
I am
Georgina
on LinkedIn, yeah. Georgina Wilkinson, yes, very
and
formal.
doing very well. I'm loving your
Thank you.
posts. And
I'm really
and on
trying.
Instagram. What's your Instagram handle?
I just changed it and I actually can't remember.
I always forget mine as well.
Yeah, I think it's Georgie She Invests DXB, I think.
Yeah, search that
My
up.
Instagram's looking a bit sad, so probably
Oh well, we'll give it a boost.
I need to do something about that soon.
We'll give it a boost. All right, amazing. Thank you. And thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Lovely. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Take care.
thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.